Today we've got Ron, who most of you already heard in the keynote, talking about zero trust. So Ron Zochalski, and he'll do his own introduction in just a minute. And we've got Endre Walls, who is the CISO from Customers Bank. He's been on several panels of mine before. Thad, unfortunately, was not able to make it this morning, so we just are going to go with two people, two amazing people. I would really encourage everybody from the audience to put questions in the chat. Would love to bring you into the conversation. And we will be talking about zero trust, continuing the conversation that Ron had this morning in your keynote, and talking about zero trust, but also talking about going back to basics, which many of you in this field have been telling me about. So without further ado, let's bring in the panel. Great, there we go. And one of the technical issues that I was having was being able to see the questions in the chat. So while Endre introduces himself and then Ron, I'm going to go over and I'll still be here, but I'm going to try to bring up the questions. So go ahead, Endre.
Thank you, Laureen. My name is Endre Jarraux. I am the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for Customers Bank and Customers Bancorp. We are responsible for the protection of almost $20 billion in assets for a financial institution. And I've been in the industry for, 24 years now. So thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here.
Great. Let's go to Ron.
Hi, I'm Ron Zochalski. I'm the actual CTO and CISO for Lake County government. I handle the judicial side and the detention side, so I handle physical security and also cybersecurity. So I got a tough job ahead of me, like everybody else does. And I also teach part-time at University of Northwest. I try to convey messages to some younger generations, which I'm trying to be effective with that too. So I appreciate the opportunity to try to share some information and do some thought-provoking conversation around zero trust. So with that.
That's great. So one of the things, yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of the zero trust misconceptions. There are some out there. I mean, we were just discussing earlier, Endre and I were just talking about how much we thought information, you get more information, the better. We, like everybody else, feel overwhelmed. And I want to make sure that we all understand clearly that what some of the misconceptions are. One is that zero trust means making a system trusted. Now, obviously by that statement, it's kind of just restating an obvious fact, but it's not. It's more of a framework. And zero trust is not about just identity. There's a lot of identity access management providers that like you to believe that, but it's not all about identity. Obviously, you want to know who's in the network, but you also want to know what they're getting access to and why they have access to it, and stop them from getting stuff that they don't need to get into and go from there. Now, there's also a misconception about there are zero trust products. There's no thing that's just a zero trust product. It's actually a framework. It's a process. I mean, that's where a lot of misconception comes out, because you see in the marketing taglines, hey, this is a zero trust, doesn't say exactly product, but this is zero trust affiliated and all kinds of crazy things. Well, it's all part of the solution. There's different solutions. Now, there's companies that have implemented a ton of solutions in the zero trust process, but John Kinderberg, being the godfather of it, has put in tested this out at Palo Alto Networks for 4 years. So it's out there. There's off-the-shelf products that actually work, that actually are implemented in here. So obviously, it's easier to keep the process simple rather than complicated. And as we all know, complexity increases risk. So, and zero trust is, you hear all this stuff because you look at it and you get all the data at you and you're thinking like, this is really complicated. It's not. So I don't know, Endre, I don't know how you feel about it, but I think zero trust is not complicated. What do you think?
I think it's not either. I sort of take the 4 core principles model to it. I think zero trust should be part of a series of processes that you have in your, I guess you could call it security program toolbox, right? It should force you to re-examine all of your default access controls. And like you said, the idea is, now there's no such thing as a trusted source. So you are always assuming that you have would-be attackers present inside and outside of the network. And I do think it's in that way, a different way of thinking about how you leverage connectivity for your systems, how applications interact with users, how users interact with each other, identity protection, device discovery. And it's funny. I think the one thing that I would tell folks, not just security practitioners, but also IT people, if you aren't good at asset management, zero trust is not for you. Right. It's like one of those basic things where you've got to know, in order to use this model, you've got to know where everything is. Yes. And I mean, everything that connects to the network. So that might be IoT devices, that might be even down to like the door strikes that control locking mechanisms for the office building, HVAC controls that are connected to the network. All of these things have to be thought about, and you have to try and make sure that you manage the identity of those devices in the network.
Well, actually, funny that you bring that up with the physical security, because that's one of the things I oversee. We've kept that completely separate and off the main network. It's its own network because and what's nice about that is that we can actually see who enters what door, what time, and it's all there. But I can't say the same for the cyber stuff. It's like, I don't know who's on. I don't know why they're there. God knows what they're getting access to. So really couldn't tell you.
We have a question from the audience, which is, I think it's a great question. Do you foresee zero trust being part of the compliance framework? Endre, what do you think?
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. It is.
These days, maybe. I think that there are a number of situations where zero trust the implementation of that model in an infrastructure would have saved some pretty key companies from a lot of embarrassment around ransomware,
right?
Especially the microsegmentation piece, which is it's the part that everybody hates about zero trust, because it tends to be not only the most expensive, but the most cumbersome thing to have to do. And so it would be interesting. The industry that I'm in, we deal with FFIEC, which is really, really good. It's tied to NIST. There are some CIS controls that are built in there as well. I could see this becoming part of that model, and part of there's been talk of sort of a critical, what's the name? Like a critical infrastructure model similar to FFIEC for companies that provide critical services like gas pipelines and stuff like that.
Right.
It would be interesting to see. I hope so. I think is the answer I would give. I hope so.
I agree on that part, but I do see that the insurance carriers will be one of the ones that try to get that going because of the cyber insurance. Because I heard some of the other conversations among the insurance industry is trying to take the charge and say, well, if we got to implement, we're going to implement standards because we're taking the risk. I don't know. So it's a very good question.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see where cyber insurance takes everybody. Yes. So let's move on and talk about, going back to the basics, because no matter how many times we, talk about this, framework or this policy or this theory, most of the conversation that I hear from you comes back to going back to the basics. So let's get your take on what you think needs to be done when it comes to the basics. Endre.
The biggest basic is assessment, assessing the organization. So I think mature security disciplines, mature security programs do assessment on an annual basis, because your business is going to change sometimes more often than that, right? So defining the attack surface, you need to identify where your sensitive data exists, assets, applications, the different services, and you have to basically identify and audit every single user access, who can access what data. It's sort of, if you're lucky enough to have started with a role-based methodology around providing access to critical resources and just business resources in general, then you got a leg up. But if you haven't done that, then that's probably your very first step, is to get into that model and then assess how your users accessing data, what those pathways and flows need to be in order to define that attack surface successfully and build out from there. And then I also mentioned microsegmentation. I don't know if I'd call it a basic step, but it is critical. And I just want to say, in this remote work environment that we're still in today, the one area of microsegmentation that everyone's forgotten are VPNs. So you tie 2,000-3,000 users into a single VPN network. That's a mistake. And a lot of companies have to undo that and segment their VPN access as well to help prevent propagation and lateral movement through the networks. So those are the two things, one not necessarily basic, but those are the two things that I would definitely go towards first.
Okay, Ron.
Yes, I agree with Endre on that part, but I think it even comes a little bit more basic about the patching issues. There's still not as much information has come out from CISA and everybody else, Homeland Security. There's a lot of companies. It goes back to the asset management part you talked about, Endre. If you don't know what assets you have, then how do you know like what's been updated and what hasn't? And you have to have things tied in. You just have to know who they are. And if we don't start at that basic point right there, at least that's the first line of defense, at least like the current Apple update that went to 14.8 on Monday. I mean, we still have people out there with iPads and everything else that still haven't updated them yet, even their own personal phones, and even their own personal phones in some instances have access to some secure data and email systems for that matter, even though, and it's, and making sure that, that there's all a solution with that. But, we've put up a lot of perimeter defenses, but we haven't done anything on the internal side, on the micro attack surface. And that's what we have to do. I mean, that's what I talked about in the conversation in my keynote, is that just making it simple, and we have to break it down, but nobody likes to do it because it's a lot of work. It just is. It's just a lot of work. And people come into the organization, they maybe like 3 years in, and that's not even 4 years in is not enough time to figure out all the systems that you have, all the technology you have in place. You got to build a roadmap. I mean, that's the first thing. If you're coming in, the consultants will come in. If you get a ransomware attack and you're bringing in the FBI, you're bringing in state police, you're bringing in all the regions, they're all asking you like, okay, where's your logs at? When's the last time you looked at them? And you're saying like, and then you figure out, well, hey, we're trying to do our best, but, you get the limited staff problem, and, you're outsourcing with vendors because you have to, because you don't have enough staff for it. I mean, cybersecurity in itself, you don't have, the universities aren't even cranking them out that fast. They're trying to do basic, they're still stuck on the programming part. They're not even close to being like, hey, we might have to make this secure. It's just that, and then, there's different, you have different machines out there. And again, we're starting basic asset management 101. This has been an issue since the 90s. There's been companies that have had, I used to work for a consulting company too, that we're like, where's all your assets? So we don't know. So we had to create a whole asset management program and consulting part just by itself, to manage the devices.
That is absolutely, absolutely critical, because it also ties to monitoring, right? If you're not monitoring every facet of your infrastructure, you're never going to be able to get there. And the reason for monitoring is so that baselines help you find anomalies. Correct. So you need a baseline across every single system, everything that's connected, in order to help you find those anomalies. You can't do that unless you know where all your assets are. Right. Exactly. It really does boil down to that one thing.
Who's where?
So how do you what do you think about the importance of executive communication? You can have, your policy in place, you can have, your playbook and all those things that you talk about, but what does that mean when you need to communicate it to the executive team and get their buy-in? Endre.
The executive conversation needs to always be about the risk, because the executives don't care about the tech. It's just a fact. They don't care about the tech. They don't care about how it works. They don't care about, what's connected to what. And they sure as hell don't care about how difficult it is, right?
Exactly.
They're,
People buy Bentleys.
they're focused, yes, they're focused on risk. And I think if you look at the average CEO these days, their focus is, how do I prevent from having to sit in front of Congress or be on some news program explaining why my company didn't do what it was supposed to? And so, that risk-based discussion that you can also, in most industries, boil down to numbers, right? There's stats out there for most industries these days on attrition from security events. It's a good baseline for you to use to be able to say, hey, if we don't do X, we could lose 15% of our customers, and that would cost us Y. Any executive will understand that and will tell you to go with God, right? And do what you got to do. And I think being able to boil down risk and financial implications is the number one way to communicate this. Forget the tech, forget the nuances, forget all of that. Just focus on the risk and numbers.
Ron, I could tell
Yes.
you're.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. But the other thing that I think the language they understand is called data breach. It's like, if you want to breach it, if you want to lose all your data, me as a customer, I give you the T-Mobile example. What are you doing with my old data? Why are you hanging on to it? Endre, if I'm a customer of your bank, why are you hanging on to my old data? Why? Why isn't it parked somewhere else and stuck in a drawer somewhere? You can exit any other time, but I'm not your current customer. What are you doing with it? They haven't even addressed that issue yet. And I want to, so you got to say, do you want your own personal data? I mean, there's been CEOs that have basically eliminated their digital profile, right? As an example. And of course, there's been some security guy who says, okay, I'll get you. The one guy, I took a class actually. It was hilarious. He says, you'll never get to our servers, and our IT's locked it down. We're hardened and everything. He came as a pizza delivery guy and stole the server right in the box just to prove a point. So it's kind of funny, but it's like thinking out of the box. I mean, they try to eliminate their electronic profile, but you're not off the radar. Your kids are tied into something. There's things that they can get to you if they want. You just don't want to be in the pin there. And I think they have to understand the reality of it. I mean, they're using personal devices themselves. I mean, they're using the latest iPhone. They can't even, let's face it. I mean, we're technology people, so we understand how to use it, but most people don't. They're lucky to find out, and their cars are overly sophisticated, right? The interfaces you can't even put the darn wipers on your car without, trying to turn off the radio or something, then you got the mapping system in there. It's totally complicated. I mean, they can't deliver a car because they're prioritizing the chips for the cell phones versus the ones for the vehicle. So what the heck are you putting in the stupid GPS anyway? I'm going to use my phone to get where I want anyway. So I think you just have to communicate to them that, hey, look, you from the technology that they use, and would they want their information hijacked out of it? What would you do if, the biggest thing coming from the wireless industry was people, get bigger size because they don't want to download their pictures, right? So then they're saying oh, I got my kids' pictures on there, and I have them nowhere else. I'm like, okay, well, how am I supposed to do this, right? So it's kind of like the same thing. They come here. Well, hey, look, don't you want to protect the data that runs your business? Don't you want it safe? I mean, right?
Yeah. Definitely presenting the risk is key.
Yeah.
So we have a couple questions in the audience. One is continuous monitoring the key to move forward on zero trust?
It's a key.
Okay.
It's a key. There's no question about that. I mean, I think when you think about monitoring, for some reason, folks always think that if you have, let's just throw a tech out there, right? Like Splunk. If you have a Splunk implementation, you've got to have folks who are sitting there watching it 24 by 7 by 365. It's not really the case. I think when you think about continuous monitoring, like I said before, is about those baselines, setting up alerts that help you figure out when something anomalous is happening, and then creating a program that allows you to triage those alerts to help you figure out noise versus what's real. And then being able to action the real stuff, right? The reason why you want continuous monitoring is because most of the things that are going to happen to you, like if we look at every single ransomware event that has occurred, has been because a user did something. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Your users are your biggest risk. Continuous monitoring allows you to see what your users are doing down to the minute, down to the second, if you have a system good enough for it, right? And being able to collect that information, have those baselines, you can pick out anomalies a lot quicker, lock things down, isolate stuff a lot sooner, and tuning that into an alert system that gives you real-time alerts, and then having your engineers who are able to receive those alerts and respond quickly, either a rotation or whatever, gives you a real leg up in being able to implement something like this. But I think it's one of several keys.
Okay, good. Ron, what's your take on it?
I am in perfect agreement with that. It's just part of the, four, for when I talked about the 4 levels of engagement, the trust in the platform and the policies is like the stage 4. So it is important, but you can't monitor everything all the time. I mean, you'll see, I'll give you from the physical aspect from it. You have video surveillance in a building, right? And, we've all seen the movies where somebody's not paying attention or what have you, but there's no physical way to physically do that because people think about it. You're going to monitor the system and watch people in and out all day. It's not going to work. You got to have alerts like Endre said. They do that in supply chain, right? I mean, they just-in-time inventory, right? They do it where, okay, well, we need this seat right now. Where the stage this vehicle needs a seat. So they got to be there in certain time windows, but you get alerts. You want to set up alerts, if there's going to be a delay or something. And of course, there's a fine involved in it. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's not going to be, there's nobody, you can't monitor 24/7. I wish that was the case, but just humanly, it's not humanly possible. But you do is to set up a framework structure.
So we have another question. It says, how do you relate the zero trust to the ever-growing insider threat? And Endre, if you want to take that, give Ron a break.
Softball.
The first thing I think is to be honest with the fact that every user is the insider threat. I mean, one of the tenets of zero trust is paranoia above paranoia, right? So you don't trust anything, you don't trust anyone, and you have it in your head that anyone could become an adversary or could become a threat. So that is definitely step one, to be able to say any user can become a threat for you at any time. And I think that when you look at insider threat, breaking it down to what we had talked about before with that role-based authentication control and what they have access to, allows you to classify your risks. And one of the things that we do is when we do our risk matrices, we also account for our users. And we do have classes of user risk. Some users are more risky to us than others. And because of that, we apply more monitoring principles, or we have different technologies that we apply to those individuals that we might not apply to the others because it would be unnecessary. So, if someone doesn't have access to something because it's just not in their job role, we might not use the same DLP policy because that generates monitoring noise. And so it does come down to aligning what your risk strategy and appetite is against the risks that you identify for your classes of users. So just like you classify data, classify your users, align that to the roles that you've given them in the authentication structure. That's the way I would say to go.
Okay, great. Ron, do you have
Sure.
anything to comment on
I
that?
would take that, even expound on that step a little bit in your own applications themselves to make sure the security profiles are up to date and current, because we did the same thing with our core system. And we have certain people that can only access certain information. It's a very complicated issue because you're trying to get somebody to not compromise their credentials. So we do, like, we'll have like obviously in my scenario, we'll have judges obviously have access to full amount of information versus somebody that's a clerk. Okay. So we know, what they're accessing, and the system does log it. We can see what they've accessed and what, that types of information within the system itself. So it is a big job. I mean, it involves, you have to understand not only what your user are accessing, but inside the system itself, there's security built in, hopefully, that you can kind of see what they're at. And you got to run reports for that too. I mean, somebody's got to run reports on it and see where they're at, and what they've actually looked at and why they've looked at it, but that does take time, and it's just, security is everybody's job.
Yeah, these are great questions. So keep them coming. And I'm going to take our panelists a little out of order of what we had prepped on, but I think this just goes along to some of these questions that are being asked. We can go to the war stories later, but let's talk about how Zero Trust can become part of the third-party risk management program. And I'll start with you, Ron.
Okay.
And I know that you talked a lot about this in your keynote. So
yeah, it's just that trust is a human emotion, right? It's something that we as individuals, we trust someone or we don't. We have a gut feeling that says, well, hey, this person is legit or not. I mean, we just know. That's kind of built in our DNA, so to speak. But when it comes to systems, it's not that way. It's just a vulnerability that is what I call exploited by malicious actors. I mean, these guys are pretty darn creative now. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, one professional I heard actually knows all this stuff got duped himself. I mean, he had him call that somebody claiming to be from the bank said there was a $800 that was charged. Did you spend $800 at Target? And he said no. So then they had the full script down as far as like how they, we'll give you a number, we'll check into this, by the way, do you have your PIN? He wasn't thinking. So of course he gave his PIN, and then, how it twirls around in the back of your head, you're like thinking like, okay, well, what am I going to do from here? Well, he calls up the bank and says, we have no knowledge of that reference number. And by the way, we're just seeing now there's money being drawn out of your account. So, it's just so third parties accessing your information is just a huge risk, because what are they going to do with that information? Like the guy that was accessing the Equifax, they were paying him a Nigerian gang actually, right? Just paid him $60 an credit form, right? Information from one customer, $60 a pop. So then he had backdoor a system, and he had access to the system even after he left. So that's because they didn't, the process isn't in place, policy isn't in place. Was it the company where, hey, well, make sure he doesn't have access to this, this, and this, or maybe he changed some profile or set up maybe had a way to do it. But I mean, there's going to be people, and then like that's how the Target breach started. It was through a third-party vendor that monitors the heating, air conditioning systems. They had access into the system itself. So that third-party risk is huge because, sometimes people don't change the passwords. I mean, come on, it's been forever. They've been announcing change your passwords, except make it anything other than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 admin, right? So it's, I just think it's just hard to third party. You're just, before this happened, before when they're all mainframes and everything was pretty locked down as far as what you can get. You might get a report, but you're not accessing the live database at all. And now we've just kind of opened up the floodgates and said, here you go, you access it yourself. And hey, you can see what, if I'm, they did it with restaurants, they allow them access in their systems and say, hey, look, how much, you're down on ketchup because they have it in there, and then they go in and get it. Next thing you know, you don't know what they're going to do with that information.
Yeah. Endre, so what are your thoughts on Zero Trust becoming part of the third-party risk management program?
I can actually give you some very pointed advice based on what we've done. So, being a bank, we already don't trust anyone. The only folks that we truly trust as a bank are the Fed, and even they're, kind of 50 for us, because, losses to a bank tend to be, in the 6-7 figure range. So we have to be super careful. One of the things that we've done, a lot of our vendors hate it. I'm going to be honest. But I'm the first person to remind a vendor that they're not doing me any favors, that my company is paying them to provide us with a service. And how we receive that service is in large part up to us. So we've placed a lot of our vendors that provide us with any sort of cloud service, they're placed behind our WAF. And so by doing that, the entry and exit point for information is managed by us. We get to see all of the traffic flow. We have our impossible travel and specialized frameworks built into those workflows in the WAF. So it's next to impossible for someone to get past all of our monitoring. And then we have systems on the back end that allow us to obfuscate and hide the real IP addresses of those systems. So we have a way to sort of mask everything. And vendors hate that because they would rather the security be up to them. But we tell them that in order to work with us, the security is up to us. And then when we have vendors who have to leverage systems that are in our infrastructure, we provide them with passwords and they get MFA tokens. So MFA or any sort of multi-factor authentication is just absolutely key for being able to do this. And my mantra is, if you're going to manage your vendors, right? Assume that they're not going to do the right thing. It doesn't, and it doesn't have to be adversarial, but you assume that they're not going to do the right thing. You assume that they're going to make mistakes. You create an environment, both contractually and through your security operations, where security is your responsibility, if not a shared responsibility, right? And make sure that the vendor is aware it's not just enough for them to have cyber insurance, because when something happens, the customer doesn't care. Quest is a perfect example of this, right? With what happened to them. They actually sent out a letter that said, hey, a vendor we used did blah, blah, blah. As one of the victims, I said, I could care less who your vendor is. It was not me. And so I'm blaming you for this. And I won't use your services anymore because I can't trust you with my information. And that's how customers feel. So, it needs to be either your responsibility solely, or at least a shared responsibility, and the vendor knows that up front. That's what I would say about managing vendor and zero trust.
Very good. Yeah. We have a question. It says, do you have a comprehensive list? What is enough besides zero trust? And I think what you were just saying, Endre, is a good answer to that as well. See, there's the same gentleman, FFLIZ, doesn't allow you to transfer the risk. So that's right.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And I feel the same way. If I get a notice on a breach that happens about that, they're pointing the fingers, I'm like, I don't care.
Right.
I don't care.
Right. I do think that we will see more frameworks that take that same stance about you can't transfer risk. And part of the reason for that is because the supply chain risk in and of itself is growing exponentially, where you have to make sure that the laptops that you got are clean before you use them. So we're in a situation of zero trust where we don't trust our hardware. We love our HP rep, but we don't trust the hardware that we get from them. So we re-image all of our devices. We use the trusted platform module, and we use disk-based encryption. And we take those pieces very seriously because we don't know. And we do spot test our hardware because, by lots, to make sure that we don't have any sort of embedded malware or ransomware. You have to take that step. And that's really what zero trust is about. It's about being paranoid above all comprehension, right? And really being serious about your paranoia.
That's true. Ron, would you like to comment or add anything else before we go on to war stories? But we've already been taught, so we're sort of weaving that in anyway. So
yeah, we are. I'll just reiterate that's unfortunately you get to the point now you can't even trust the hardware that you get. It's just the way it is. I mean, you can't even trust. Well, the iPhone, the only ones that I really choose to trust, honestly, was BlackBerries because they were actually pretty secure. But after that went away, that was it. Other than that, I don't know where else we can go. So we should probably go on the war stories right about now.
Yeah. Let's go. I know the audience will find this interesting. I'm sure everybody in the audience has got some war story of their own. But it's sort of interesting just to hear what you were faced with, and how you overcame it. Because I know you went through a pretty serious breach, and have good experience in that area, unfortunately.
Yes. We unfortunately in July of 19, there was being a regional, we're the second largest county in Indiana. We had an issue. There was another smaller county they tried to attack. They actually ended up paying the ransomware. It was the smaller numbers back in 19. It's not the numbers that are now that they're getting. And I said, I raised the awareness to senior management, in my area is commissioners and council members that are elected, and raising their awareness that that's a shot. I call it the shot over the bow. So when they shoot a shot here and there, they came out about they got somebody inadvertently clicked on something. As much as awareness as I tried to create, just didn't know, was in there early, and basically clicked on something, and next thing you know, they got the sign, and next thing you know, I shut down our email server like instantaneously. That was it. We were fortunate enough, I happened to be in my lunch hour, believe it or not, and got a call. I go, you got to be kidding me. I didn't even take a bite of my sandwich yet. I go, here we go. So I said, so basically we just disconnected everything. And that's it. I have no idea where it's coming from and where. And we shut everything down, and we went to as paper-based as we possibly could. And then, we told outside people that, any kind of our customers, were paying their property tax and such and such, right? You basically we could just take stuff manually and it'll get processed. And once the system comes back alive, we see what's going on. I call it lucky because I was putting in, we had gone through security profiles with our main systems, and we were safe from that part. But we didn't know where anything else lied. Like, we don't know where it propagated to or anything else. So yeah, obviously we brought in, with being, we have the county police right in the building. So we tied in the state police and FBI and you name it was here, investigating everything. So we were on it to make sure, but it was a scary experience because I thought we're screwed, because I knew what some of the fallacies were and what some of our payoff points that we hadn't gotten to yet. And I go, we're done, we're doomed. I go, I don't know what we're going to do. So I was in the process of changing some things. I mean, setting up different backups at different places. And so it's very hair-raising experience when you have to go through it. I mean, it was like a drill. It was like because
I was going to ask you about what lessons you learned from that. You say it's like a drill. Exactly. It's like a tabletop drill that you're living real time.
It was active shooter training is what I call it. They've had to have that in government buildings. They put what I learned is that you have to start a lot sooner than you ever thought you could. And you just have to keep constantly looking at, again, trying to move your best to a zero trust model, taking it step by step. It may take you 4,500 steps to get there, but you're just going to have to take it day by day and just do the best you can with it. Learning lessons were like, trusted too many people. I mean, we did it on our own system side, but on the outside, there was too much that was, and more of the I would say I've spent more time at least educating people on, what some of the stuff looks really legit. I mean, I've sent out examples of things. For their own personal information. I would say try to relate to those people that actually for them to understand it. That it was an honest mistake. I'm not a big fan of the actual phishing simulations, because it tells you, oh, well, you clicked on this. Well, that's kind of negative reinforcement. That's not the point. The point is to show you examples of how you can make an honest mistake, and you're going to make one. Okay, but just here's are some of the things to look out for. And I think that the education part of it is huge. I think, and I didn't think it was I thought we had enough in place that we would be okay, but that wasn't the case. So just to encapsulate it, I would say educate as many people as possible. And back to you talked about the board, everybody at every level to understand, what it is, and that it's not, security might be a problem. Like, Andre talked about even the third party vendors, they're going to not be happy about it. But guess what? I don't allow access to the people in the building. I mean, you don't get in. We got a scanner at the front. Everything's checked. There's no cell phones allowed in the courtrooms. Okay. There's stuff that we do it on a physical security side. We have video systems on monitoring. We just have to do a better job on who you're allowing access to your information and why they have to get it.
Okay. Great.
That's the best I can give you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Andre, let's hear from you and, share some lessons learned so that people can take that as a takeaway and help better protect their organizations.
I'm fortunate that we haven't, and I'm knocking on wood, you just can't tell.
Right. I'm knocking for you right now.
We haven't had any issues, but we have a lot of commercial customers, a lot of corporate customers, a lot of law firms, a lot of construction companies, a lot of critical infrastructure companies, some global companies. They've dealt with this, and the sort of bank that customers is our customers are part of our family. So when those companies have had issues, I've had talks with their CISOs, with their IT folks, and it's just part of what we do. My security organization does outreach with those companies, and I can tell you we've seen ransomware increase, especially since and I don't know how many people know this. I think more are starting to learn. So Federal Reserve banks are prohibited from paying out ransomware or paying out ransoms. So if a company came to us and said, hey, we got hit with a ransomware event and we want you to transfer $10 million to this location, we legally have to tell them no. So we've dealt with a lot of those things and been able to kind of go back and help our customers sort of refocus themselves so that they can be prepared. And so, the sort of nuggets, my takeaways, I agree on the education piece. I do love phishing simulations as long as they're done right, right? So I think the three elements that make a phishing simulation work are, step one, it has to be as close to real world as possible, which means it does have to be difficult. You should have a certain percentage of users that you expect to fail. You want people to educate. And I think the real stat is not how many people have passed the phishing simulation, but how many people have never failed more than once, right? And how many people actually learned from the simulation. The other piece of that is, and I'm not trying to endorse any products here, but we do use KnowBe4. And one of the things that I like about their platform is that they have a second chance box. So when you have an email and you go to click on it, whether the link is valid or not, if it came externally to you, when you go to click on a link, it asks you the question, this is where this link is actually taking you to. Are you sure you want to go? Gives people an opportunity to inspect the link to see if it's the same name as the company that sent it to them, et cetera, et cetera. And if they click no, then it gets sent to our security operations team. We evaluate it in a sandbox and tell them if it's valid or not, and then they can do it. Or if it's a problem, we tell them, hey, great, you did great. And then we gamify that by giving our users prizes and stuff, people who find the most fish links and that sort of thing. We do like packages of Swedish fish, et cetera.
Yeah, that's funny.
And I feel like that educational experience is really critical, because now, LinkedIn is a great phishing tool. People can figure out who works in an organization, who does what, who's connected to who, how important are they or not important. They tend to go after the folks who they think are not that important. They tend to go after, executive assistants and marketing folks and people that they think might not think twice about why someone's contacting them. We've even seen fake journalists. That's my favorite one. Fake journalists who reach out to you and they say that they're from some company that does conferences or a company that does these like media profiles, and they want to profile you. And they ask you all of these questions, and a lot of these questions tend to be quite intimate about your business and what you do and what systems you use and what technology.
Right.
And, you know, those types of things. So, you know, the education piece is really important from that standpoint. But the other thing that I've noticed that's common with ransomware is the embarrassment factor. A lot of times these companies would tell us that they didn't know that it happened for an hour or so while the person tried to figure out how to fix it themselves. A lot of times the user will think, oh, if I just quickly unplug my network connection, reboot my computer, now everything's okay, right? And I think having the honest conversation with your users about what those things look like and a see something, say something culture is extremely important to prevent these sorts of things. People will absolutely make mistakes, and that's the reason why we go through the trouble of implementing a zero trust type architecture to limit the impact of the mistakes that human beings make. And I think, you know, we didn't say it from the beginning, but that's probably the key takeaway that I hope everyone who's listening to this has, is zero trust isn't about preventing things from happening. Absolutely. There is no absolute prevention. It's really about limiting the damage and enabling a quicker recovery. It is part of a strategy to do that. And so, you know, the experiences that I've had are users. You know, get them trained, help them understand what to look for, help them understand what the risks are, and then most importantly, create those relationships and connective tissue that makes what they do part of what your security department does. So instead of being that department that operates in the back room, everyone in your company feels like they too are a security engineer, and security is their responsibility too. And if they see something odd, they say something. I think building that kind of culture is the number one thing you have to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we just switched to a new phishing technology and security awareness training. So it's going to be more often. And it's interesting because once we as employees of Accellion learn what the consequences are, then, you know, we kind of have more skin in the game, so to speak. And like you said, Andre, like you don't want to unplug and just hope that you can fix this. You got to immediately tell somebody. And so I think that's what the training has done for me. And I think it's an important aspect of that, because we employees are the number one risk, right? So very good. We have a couple questions here. How do you confirm a client before executing instructions received via phone using zero trust? These are some very specific zero trust questions.
Yeah,
yeah. How do you confirm a client before executing instructions received via phone using zero trust?
You know, the simple answer to that is to have a callback process where if they call you and they give you an instruction, you say, okay, and you don't tell them what's going to happen. You say, okay, we're going to follow our process. And then you call back the number that you have on file for that person to ensure that you have the right person. I know most people might say something like OLTP or OTP, but I think that there's too many holes there. I think the callback process is the simplest and most low-tech way to solve that problem.
Okay, very good. So that's about it. We have, I think we've actually provided the audience with a lot of really good information. If you're interested to connect with Andre and Ron, please feel free to reach out to them either through the chat here in the event that's going on, or directly to LinkedIn. So with that, we will wrap the panel and bring back Kim. Hopefully everybody's ready. There we go.